So with that, let me introduce somebody that I think, in a way, we think we know. It's sort of like, oh yeah, that's Anthony. Okay, well, but let's do an appropriate introduction. He is the lead pastor at Mission House, which is an evolving, growing, developing literally mission-oriented gathering of God's people, currently describing itself as an urban abbey. That's another whole conversation. You can talk to Anthony about that later, but as lead pastor there and leader in the community, he is now on city council. He's an author, if you didn't know that, like in book, poet. Between he and Tony, they've got 6 kids and 6 grandkids who see him as Grampy. That's the official stuff that he told me. Oh, that's who I am. I've gotten to know Anthony pretty well over the last 8 or 10 years as we've been spending a fair amount of time in conversation. Anthony is a voracious reader. And the magnificent thing about Anthony is he not only reads the stuff, he remembers it. And can tell you who said what in which book, which is amazing to me. He's a strategist, somebody who thinks strategy. He's a Navy veteran, and he is a practical politician, a practical servant leader, I think is probably the best way. Politician gets such pejorative overtones in our culture. Today, he's going to bring us 2 gifts from Birmingham, Alabama. One, of course, is major subject of his presentation today, Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail. But he also brings himself. He is a son of Birmingham. And so without saying anything more, I present to you Tony's husband, Reverend Anthony Smith. Go for it, Anthony.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Glad to see you all on this Zoom call, and grateful for the invitation to come and share a reflection about the letter from a Birmingham jail. And so MLK'S letter from a Birmingham jail. And so I'm grateful for, once again, to share this. One of the things that we do in our community here at Mission House, we didn't do it this year, but every year for the past 5-6 years, we made it a pilgrimage to do a community reflection open to the larger community, to reflect together over the month of February, and sometimes even in April, the letter from a Birmingham jail. We go line by line, context, history, principles, and it's been a very life-giving practice for me personally and for others as well. And what it has done is expand our imaginations about what is possible in the ways that we organize and mobilize in our community. And so it's been a great resource for myself and many other people that have engaged in this kind of practice. And so we're glad that we are here today to share with this. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you for the executive committee for inviting me out to share with this. Many blessings to you. And I am Tony's husband. Tony is not on today, but she's at work. She's a cosmetologist. So, Saturday is the busiest day for cosmetologists, or other than that, she would be here today or sitting right here watching the clock and making sure that I stay on task. So y'all pray my strength in the Lord that I stay on task today. So I have a few minutes to share with you. And today is really a brief reflection. This letter is so deep, so multi-layered, so rich and textured that just a session like today doesn't really do justice to what King had penned on scraps of paper that were handed to him while he was in the Birmingham jail. But I want to jump into this. Why talk about this letter now? What relevance does Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., letter from a Birmingham jail written in April of 1963 has today? What are the lessons we can learn? What principles can we harvest from this letter composed of sacred words in the American canon of democracy, liberation, abolition, and social justice? To dispense with the surprise of why this is relevant today, I want to put forward that King's letter is still a word for us today, a word of Socratic tension, a word of liberation, a word of realism, grounded in the demands of the oppressed and their allies, a word for those that are among the creatively maladjusted, and a word for those prisoners of hope fighting against injustice and building a world and community that is diverse, inclusive, and equitable. King describes his letter this way in one of the opening paragraphs. He says, "Never before have I written so long a letter." And y'all, the letter is really long. "I'm afraid it is much too long to take your precious time. I can assure you that it would have been much shorter if I had been writing from a comfortable desk. But what else can one do when he is alone in a narrow jail cell, other than write long letters, think long thoughts, and pray long prayers?" Martin Luther King Jr. from the letter from a Birmingham city jail. In April of '63, Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested and sent to jail in Birmingham, Alabama, for organizing a nonviolent protest. 8 well-intentioned would-be white clergymen, sympathetic to the struggles of the civil rights movement, published an editorial urging King and the other organizers of the Birmingham campaign that sought to dismantle Jim Crow segregation and address the social conditions underlying systemic racism, to be patient and exercise restraint. And I would fail to mention that we have somebody who marched today and participated in protests. Didi Wright, thank you for your witness. And so, you felt the prophetic fire of this, right? And so the clergymen discouraged protest and believed that the solution ought to be made through closed door negotiations in the courts. King responded to the clergymen with a prophetic letter that is relevant today as it was 50 something or 60 plus years ago. Though some things have changed over the decades, racism and systemic oppression still remain today. The recent deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and countless others before them who for centuries have lost their lives because of the color of their skin, are a reminder of why we cannot wait when it comes to injustice. King's letter sets fire to the conscience, calling us to nonviolent action and non-participation in unjust systems, policies, and laws. He challenges well-intentioned community members who advocate patience to look carefully at the patterns of racial injustice, oppression, pain, and trauma that have gone unnoticed and underanalyzed for decades in a community. As we collectively discern answers and think deeply and seriously about action, we can gain strength and wisdom from some of King's thoughts from the letter from a Birmingham jail. The first principle that we learn from this letter, if you get a chance, I would highly advise, there's a lot of audio tellings or readings of the letter from the Birmingham jail. There is actually video of people speaking and doing this. King actually has an audio version of him actually reading his letter, but I would highly suggest, if you had the time, to sit in and listen to that. But here's a principle that we glean from the letter. Prepare for creative tension. Turn to your neighbor. You know I'm a preacher. Turn to your neighbor and say, prepare for creative tension. Your digital neighbor. King says this, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly worked and preached against violent tension, but there is a type of constructive nonviolent tension that is necessary for growth. See, change is forged through tension. Our discomfort is a small price to pay for centuries of the harm and the lived experiences of racism and all manners of injustice. The next principle, you got to go upstream. Upstream. King continues, he says, you, and he's speaking to the clergyman, you deplore the demonstrations that are presently taking place in Birmingham, but I am sorry that your statement did not express a similar concern for the conditions that brought the demonstrations into being. I am sure that each of you would want to go beyond the superficial social analyst who looks merely at effects and does not grapple with underlying causes. What is King saying? Before we focus solely on misguided, in our case, and even in our own city, before we focus solely on misguided violence perpetrated by a few people in our community, it is vital and appropriate to discern root causes. The suffocating pressure and roadblocks of systemic inequity has caused immeasurable harm to people of color, even in this community. We must go upstream. As Archbishop Desmond Tutu, God bless him, God rest his soul, of the anti-apartheid movement said, he says this, we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. King's words invite us, no, they call us to action to have a more serious analysis of root causes of the challenges in our community. Let me give you an example of recent memory that many people are talking about right now. See, I've been in quite a few exchanges with people about the uptick in community violence in Salisbury in light of the Catawba shooting incident. And consistently, I'm told that fatherlessness is the problem. Absent fathers, we are told, is the big reason violence hits some communities more than others. Well, King's letter would ask us to go further upstream. Why are there a disproportionate amount of Black fathers not living with their children? This is important, especially when you learn that according to the Centers for Disease Control, that although Black fathers are disproportionately not living with their children, they are more present in the lives of their children than any other racial group. I bet some of y'all didn't even know that. This racist stereotype of Black fathers is an example of staying downstream rather than go upstream to look at the ways economic policies, criminal justice policies, and education policies bring harm and perpetuate inequities in a community. We must go upstream. Next principle. We are all connected. King said this, and people are familiar with this quote. This is in the letter. King says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Injustice is an assault on the human person, even if we are not directly affected by it. Our network of mutuality demands collective action. We belong to each other. Or as I'm known to say, and I'm in the habit of saying, that we have to practice Ubuntu. We see this with King in this quote. Ubuntu is a South African philosophy that essentially says, I am because we are. If I'm not free, if you're not free, then I'm not free. If you don't have resources, I don't have resources. So we all must work together to ensure our common wealth for the common good. Next principle, good people cannot be silent. King says this, shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Let me say that again. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. The most pernicious danger is not the manifest actions of those with bad intentions. It is the apathy and inaction of well-intentioned members of our community. We have a responsibility to be active agents of change, to be an army of what King called the creatively maladjusted. Next principle. So we move from good people cannot be silent to this one. We must be good thermometers and we must be faithful thermostats. We must be good thermometers and faithful thermostats. For too long, almost entirely focused on becoming mediocre thermometers. As a community, we observe, measure, and report on the symptoms of injustice with great righteous indignation. Going back to the fatherlessness piece, King will urge us to go upstream, to go deeper than in our analysis. Recently I had a conversation with someone. The big problem that we have is that fathers are not in the home. I said, that's a symptom, not a cause. There's a reason why there's a disproportionate amount of, especially Black fathers and fathers of color that are not in the home. What are the causes of that? We never go down the chain. We never go upstream. But King says we could be better thermometers, right? We also need to be thermostats, as King says. We could be thermostats, right? Because the thermometer tells you what the temperature is. The thermostat controls the temperature. So sometimes we need to be better thermometers as well, because sometimes we get the temperature wrong. Sometimes we get the analysis wrong. We don't even know what the temperature is. We don't realize how cold it is outside sometimes. But once we figure that out, once we become good thermometers, then we can also be good thermostats. We can be thermostats that go upstream, but few of us are thermostats ready to turn up the heat to accelerate needed change in our community. Because one thing to be on Facebook and yell about this and be a keyboard gangster or a keyboard activist, but when you actively decide to become an actual thermostat, to be an active agent of change, to be a person whose presence in the community raises the temperature to accelerate change in the community. We have a choice to make. We can remain mediocre thermometers, or we can become good thermometers and faithful thermostats. And I'm heading to my closing. We stand at an apocalyptic moment in this community. The pandemic has laid bare for all to see the persistent inequities that exist across race, class, and gender. We are a community in need of transformational change. We must support both downstream efforts in our community, but we also must give support and greater analysis with upstream efforts to act and demand action to address the inequities of our different systems in our community. There's much we can learn from King in this letter. King's sweeping use of the Western canon of moral philosophy, drawing from the United States Constitution, the prophetic exhortations of the Hebrew prophets, the dialogical process of Socrates, the apostolic witness of the earliest Christian communities, the witness of Jesus of Nazareth, the teachings of this and practices of this first century Galilean Jew that was crucified by the imperial power of Rome for upsetting the social order. This and more witnesses mentioned by King are the resources we need to draw upon in this hour, an hour characterized by a growing authoritarian dynamic in our society, from voter suppression, the ending of time-honored, hard-fought equal rights, the subjugation of the planet by the profit motive, pipelines of death and destruction, the removal of protections from the protected classes who are increasingly becoming unprotected. No need to look further than what's happening on the Supreme Court today. But like in King's day, I'm sure all of this looks and feels daunting and overwhelming. So much is happening at once. I advise you to read King's letter in its entirety. What it offers is clarity. People ask me all the time, what do we need right now, Pastor? What do we need to do, Reverend Councilman? What do we need to do? I said, the first thing we need is clarity. Because it does no good to act and mobilize resources when you don't have a clear picture of what's going on. If you don't know the weather, if you're not aware of the temperature, you need clarity. But King's letter gives us clarity. It helps us cultivate and foster a moral clarity as we engage our community. And it is an invitation to become prisoners of a hope rooted in collective action. In the Hebrew scriptures, the prophet Zechariah delivers an oracle to the children of Israel. They've been in captivity to the overwhelming force of the Babylonian Empire. Zechariah offers these words, Zechariah 9:12. I'm a preacher, so I got to quote scripture today. But I'm being ecumenical because this is the Jewish scriptures, right? So I'm being ecumenical here. Zechariah 9:12. Return to your stronghold, O prisoners of hope. Today I declare that I will restore to you double. Return to your stronghold, O prisoners of hope. One of the things about King's letter, King describes himself like the Hebrew prophets. I'm coming to deliver this letter. I'm coming to deliver a message to my lukewarm friends, just like the prophets of old did. And Zechariah's call is to tell Israel that even in their captivity to a foreign power with overwhelming political and economic and military force, he describes them as prisoners of hope. I know you feel captive to this system of oppression that surrounds your people, but I need you to understand that I need you to return to your stronghold. I need you to return to the resources and sources of your strength and become prisoners of hope. Brothers and sisters, here in Rowan County, what if we became captive, and more so than the current captivity of the injustices in our world? The weight of the world's problems can weigh us down, make us feel like we are in a kind of social prison. Feelings of helplessness and despair come in like a flood. We say to ourselves, this is just too much. But what if we became prisoners of hope, captive to the collective actions we can make together in this community, as King lays out in the letter? And King gives real practical principles on how to move forward with change. He says, one, in any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps. 1, collection of the facts to determine whether injustices are alive. Not just reacting, not just acting out of one's emotions, right? Sometimes people do act out of that, understandably, because people have been living and trying to survive in unjust conditions for a long time. So sometimes people just have to yell out and be upset. We get that. But when it comes to a collective action, when it comes to marshaling and mobilizing our people and our communities into the community to address a serious issue, you got to collect the facts. 2, once you know the facts, 2, go into negotiation. 3, self-purification. Self-purification is about introspection, looking at one's motives, checking one's ego. Why am I doing this? What is my why for engaging in this project? What is my why for convening the community together to engage in some kind of transformative action? Why am I doing this? So you got to have a ritual of self-purification. What is your intention? 4, lastly, when all else comes down to it, sometimes you got to go into direct action. You may have to engage in a civil disobedience. You may have engaged in some kind of action with a few people that you're rolling with, whoever your tribe is. One of the things I've learned in this community is it's never effective to just go it alone. You got to go with others. So what does Salisbury Rowan needs? What can we learn from King's letter? May we be those imprisoned to hope, a collective action rooted working downstream and going upstream. That's my reflection.
Y'all want to say amen, preacher? But beyond that, it isn't just saying, oh, that was nice, Anthony. Beyond that, it means taking the next steps. Now, and Anthony, you're in the role of host at this point. We've got 10 or 12 minutes of opportunity for discussion with Anthony. So as you want to say something, respond, ask further questions, please go to your reaction blurb and raise your hand to speak. The reaction toolbar at the bottom or top of your screen, wherever it is on your Zoom call, and raise your hand. Or
so I'm looking in the chat, so that's where I should be looking, right?
Okay. Chat, or if we see a hand raised.
Oh, okay. Oh, hand raised. I don't see a hand raised, so unless I'm missing. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I do see a hand raised. I was going through the top left. Mary James.
Oh God, sorry, battling a cold. Anthony, I wonder if you could elaborate a little more. I was curious what you said. We hear all the time about the fatherless homes, in the Black community. And as you say, that's the go-to answer. But you're saying that's a symptom. Don't look at that. Look at the causes. And I think you said that actually Black fathers, I think you said, are even more connected to their kids than other groups. And I didn't quite understand that. And I guess I don't know whether that requires too long an answer, but then what are the causes? What points can we make to those who constantly say fatherless Black homes is a problem?
Right. So I'm not saying don't look at that. What I'm saying is when we start talking about community violence, a lot of times what happens, there's a sort of a racist stereotype that's been in existence in this society for a very long time regarding Black people. And so one of the ways that manifests is the way we talk about fatherlessness in the Black community. The reality is that Black men are disproportionately not living in the homes with their children. That is true. But according to the CDC, recent report, I can post a link in here, I'll find it. Out of all the racial groups, Black fathers are actually more present in the lives of their children than any other racial group. And what that means is They spend time with them more, feed them, read to them, take them to school. And I know for some people's lived experience, they may, I don't know about that, but it also depends on your lived experience. If you live in a community that's predominantly Black, you're not going to see other racial groups and how they deal with their family and their dynamics. But statistically speaking, according to the CDC, this racial stereotype doesn't hold. The fact of the matter is, most times Black fathers are single. They're just not married. And so the household arrangement is just different. And so one of the things we learned is also this, and this may explain some other thing too, is that the least present racial group in fathers is white men. White men are least present in the lives of their children than Black men, and any other racial group, actually. That's something to really wrestle with, because that could explain a couple of things sociologically, what happens with white men in our culture. But that's not the whole conversation. But my thing is, so it's not that we don't look at these things. There are some things downstream that we must look at. Like we continue to support, after school programs, early childhood development, our mentoring programs, all these things, because there's a lot of young men in our community who may not have a father in the home. They may have a father who's present in their lives, but not in the home, but they also may have father figures in their lives, right? They may have extended family, right? Because the situation gets far more complex than what we normally hear rhetorically in the news, and even politically, even locally, right? People are so quick to go to the typical political memes about things like this. So we can go deeper into that, but Orlando Carter?
Orland?
Orland.
Yes, it's Orland, not Orlando.
Sorry, I thought I saw O at the end. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Anthony, for speaking out, and appreciate your comments. My thought was that every February, which is Black History Month, and we focus on Black history and Black causes and Black accomplishments. We always do this every February, but I think it's important that we not forget this as we move through the year into March and April and into this campaign that we're currently putting our energies into. We need to remember all that and carry it forward throughout the campaign, and keep that in our minds as we elect candidates and go forward with our efforts. That was just my thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Orland. Appreciate that. And I agree, absolutely. Mr. E, right?
Thank you, Anthony. I had really mixed emotions. I have an old copy of the letter from Birmingham, but I wanted to comment on two things. One, what Mr. Orland just stated about Black History Month. Black History Month really is not for us. We live Black history every day. Black History Month is usually for white people, so that you can understand what we're doing. But to answer the questions relative to Black fathers being present in the home, I think that data that Anthony was citing from the CDC or wherever, what happened when Black men would lose their jobs and go to try to get some assistance from the government was always willing to feed Black women and Black children if the father was not present in the home. The father may have lost his job or whatever, so it would appear that the fathers are leaving the home, but the government was not willing to assist if a man was present. And for whatever reason, the man was unemployed. The government said, well, we will give you food if there's not a Black man present. But it didn't mean there was a Black man not present in the home. It did not mean that the Black male was not present in the child's life. So it is true that the data is skewed and it's overbroad at best. So I just wanted to add to that comment.
Right.
Thank you.
And Didi, you make a really great point, because a lot of people are not aware of how social welfare programs shifted in the
Right.
60s, when the welfare rolls began to increase with peoples of color, because prior to that, but most of the welfare recipients, and even to this day, were white people in the 40s and 50s, the father could be present in the home.
Right.
But when the shift occurred in the 60s, when there was more of an integration, more of the welfare rolls will open up to people of color, the policy shifted.
And if I want to move to a third point, and I'll be quiet. As I was reading the letter from the Birmingham jail, it was reminiscent of what is in my book to come in March. Said if he was talking about how I doubt if you would be so quickly to condemn the police officers when you would see them in the jails and how they treated old Negro women and young Negro girls, and how they kicked old Negro men and beat young Black boys. So it's an observation, having been in jail overnight, to experience that treatment. Again, that's in the book coming in March from Dee Wright, to share her experience also in the South Carolina Columbia jail. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee. I look forward to reading your book.
Thank you.
All right. Jeff has his hand up.
Right. I think Shirley's hand was up before mine. If you, Shirley, if you could unmute. Shirley? Well, I would just want to piggyback on what Dee said. I was visiting in a Black home on the south side of Chicago that I was assigned to get to know that family. And while I was there and the mother was serving the meal, this man appeared on the back porch. Of course, he was wondering what this, I was in grad school at the time, he was wondering what this young white man was doing in her kitchen at his table. And she explained the program that I was involved in, etc. But at that point, the law was, with social welfare, if he was caught in the home, she would lose the welfare, she would lose the income to feed the children and herself. That was law. And, you know, that's, again, folks don't know that. I don't know how and when that kind of stuff has shifted or to what extent, but that was the law in 1968 in Chicago, and that was a federal law. So that's just affirming that. Okay, Shirley's hand is up. Can you unmute, Shirley, so that you can speak?
I see Pam. I don't see Shirley. Can you do it, Jeff? I'm not sure if
I don't.
I don't. Only person's hand I see up is Pam's.
Mm,
Shirley. I'm trying to find Shirley. Where is Shirley?
Jeff, I didn't raise my hand.
oh, I thought I saw your hand up. Oh, okay.
I see Pam Bloom. Pam?
Going to those last 4 points. Currently, there are a lot of people in Salisbury and hopefully also throughout Rowan County concerned about crime. And I can see where a lot of people are at number 4, they're ready for action. Maybe they're at number 3 and think they've answered that they know why they're there because they want crime to go down. But how do we get to that collection of facts in negotiation? How do we get those 2 things to start first? Because I don't think we can't go anywhere with the last 2 if we don't have the first 2.
Right. Yeah. The challenge is that a lot of times we approach facts and our observations with ideological or political beliefs and commitments that we have to just bolster those. That's why, you know, in the aftermath of Catawba, people immediately just began to say it's the fatherless homes, it's the mama, it's the parents' fault, it's, you know, it's TV, and people start, you know, just kind of getting into these kind of debates and stuff. But when in reality, we need to lean heavily on facts. We need to be in conversation with social services. We need to be in conversation with health department. We need to understand the problem. And so we need a deeper social analysis than sort of political culture war stuff. Because, and that again, this speaks to the challenge that we have, because when we revert to political or culture war rhetoric, it actually causes more harm. It distracts us from actually getting the facts. So for instance, like one thing a real concrete thing that I'm doing right now with several other people is we're trying to bring cure violence model to Salisbury, which is a public health approach to addressing violence. It's not a law enforcement based approach. It's not a model rooted in punishment or crime and punishment. It's a model rooted strictly in public health and public safety. And so the first step in that is to do an assessment. There is a collection of crime data, but there's also a collection of other indicators in the community to begin to discern a picture about how to create a public health intervention against violence. So those are the kind of things I think that need to happen in our community, in concert with working with other nonprofits, other community groups, individuals who have a passion for this issue in our community. So I think too often when we have intractable social problems, too often we tend to go from the gut. And the thing is, that's not sustainable. We go off emotion, we go off of reaction, we go off of what we saw on YouTube and Facebook. And so we got to become scientists in many ways. We got to become really good analysts of what's going on. And King addressed this in his letter when he was talking to addressing the clergyman. He says, we can't have superficial social analysis. And oftentimes, unfortunately, that happens. And what ends up happening is, like I always tell people all the time, you have shallow analysis, you're gonna have shallow action. Deep analysis could yield deep transformation. Thank you, Pam. Dottie? You still there?
Yes, I am. I had to find the unmuted person. I was really struck by the root causes, and that's where we don't go a lot, I think, of the root causes. Most of you know that I'm very involved in Bread Riot, where we get grants and purchase local food from local farmers, and we pay them and then distribute it to people in need. And I'm also involved at Healthy Rowan, and it's been occurring to me that why do we want people to be healthy? I mean, we talk about we want people to be healthy. And I think that if people are healthy, and for me, that means eating healthy food, not junk food, not canned food, not processed food, real food that comes locally, preferably. There's a lot of it here. And if people are healthy, it seems to me that healthy people are able to think, they're able to respond, they are able to do things in life that you can't do if you're sick or malnourished or have all kinds of health problems. Some of them as simple, we say, as diabetes or high blood pressure, and common as that. If people could be healthy, eating healthy food. Now, the other side of this is I've learned that many people do not know how to cook real food. And for us to try to do some helping people learn to cook real food. There are lots of simple recipes. I use them all the time, simple, healthy recipes. So I was advocating to Harry McLaughlin that he use his grocery store as a basis to help people learn to cook and to use healthy food and to get the Livingstone culinary people involved and to maybe use some of that gob of money that went to the West End to help people be healthy. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Dottie. You know, Anthony does have this other commitment. Let's just say thank you to Anthony before he has to leave. We can keep the conversation going. Thank you very much, good friend. Excellent job. We appreciate you, and it will be up on our YouTube. Thank
All
you
right.
very much.
Blessings, y'all.